All right. I think everybody's on. Looking good. Um, cool. So we're going to chat here for just a second and give people a minute to join. There's always a few stragglers in here. Carol, Charlie, where are you guys in from?
Charlie, do you want to go first, or shall I jump in?
Sure. I'm calling from I put sunny Buffalo, New York. It's a fairly calm day when most people think it snows here year round, but East Coast.
Nice. How about you, Carol?
I'm dialing in from the UK, so we've had an awful lot of rain this last few months, so it is still presently raining. So I always joke to my team, we've got a field behind our house, and it's actually presently a lake. So
Oh, wow.
it is definitely raining a lot here.
Awesome. I'm joining from Knoxville, Tennessee. We've had it cold the last few days this week, so it's been back down about below freezing. Everybody was hoping we were going to have an early spring. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but well, cool. Let's get going here. Excited to jump into this one. Like I told you guys a little bit earlier, this topic's near and dear to my heart. So we're here talking about smart spending, strong branding, increasing ROI, and marketing. And so, quick introduction on my side. My name's Jason Hubbard. I'm CEO at RevGenius. I've spent last 15 plus years in a variety of roles, but the majority of those, head of marketing, head of growth, head of demand gen, all those different flavors of it. So when I say near and dear, it's truly near and dear, and I've been through these exercises many times and seen the good and the good, the bad, and the ugly around all of it. And so we have Carol Howley with us from Exclaimer, and we have Charlie Riley here from Send. Carol, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, of course. So for those of you who don't know Exclaimer, we're an email signature management solution. So we give businesses the power to unlock their email signatures as a digital marketing and advertising channel. For me personally, similarly to yourself, Jason, I've been around in SaaS and marketing for a little while, but very much working on demand and brand sort of areas, and product marketing. They've been really the areas that I've absolutely loved, and worked at a number of brands, including Skyscanner, which for Americans, you've probably got Kayak over there. That was the biggest competitor to us at the time I was there. And also Canonicals, which is very similar to a Red Hat equivalent, which is a bit bigger over there as well. So a number of big sort of SaaS IT brands. And as I said, really my heart's definitely in product marketing and brand and sort of demand. So very much a topic close to my heart too.
Awesome. How about you, Charlie?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm calling in from Send. So Send is an insurtech. So we're actually based out of London, where Carol's calling in from. But we're a global remote company. And so I was the first US hire to help grow the brand over here. And we really sell to commercial insurers. So we've built an underwriting workbench is our core product to essentially take the submissions that insurers get, speed those up, remove a lot of the manual processes, and give them better insight into making decisions and to make more money. So we really work within a finite area within commercial insurance. I've been a marketing leader, sales lead for 20 plus years now, across a wide range of industries in SaaS, ed tech, like I said, insurtech, but also in traditional industries, insurance, manufacturing, and really kind of, like you said, have the battle scars across trying to build demand gen, but branding and really revenue across all the functions. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we'll set the stage a little bit. As everybody is painfully aware, things shifted dramatically about a year and a half ago in the space. It went from, I experienced this one personally, recruiters banging down my door to try and poach me from where I was at to, felt like just a few weeks, everybody was starting to get laid off. And so go-to-market broke for a lot of companies. Go-to-market teams were the ones typically, hardest hit. You guys gave me some great stats, supporting something I'd seen or felt anecdotally, was that of those go-to-market teams, marketing seemed to be hammered more than anybody else out of it. So you guys shared with me 68.31% of marketing leaders indicated that they had their budgets reduced by at least 5 to 10%, and 13.86 had their budget cut between 20 and 40%. So, kind of hard to argue with that sentiment based off of the stats that you guys shared with me. And so, whenever you're facing that kind of thing, of course, the answer to how you survive, it has to be, got to be really efficient, and kind of ruthlessly efficient with what you're doing. And similar to you guys, I'm a strong believer that brand can be one of the most effective ways that you can try and navigate this type of thing. And I think, as painful as a lot of this stuff has been, there's a lot of value in it as well when the easy buttons stop working and we all have to actually get really good at what we're doing. And it sort of brings those of us that do it and do it well kind of to the top, and exposes the weaknesses and areas that need to be worked on and improved. For even those of us that are good, exposes that, but some to a more dramatic degree than others. But before we kind of jump into what role brand has to play kind of in all of this, wanted to start with something just kind of really, really foundational. Let's get your guys' explanation or definition of what this brand thing is. Because obviously brand is a pretty wide-ranging thing that can mean a lot of things for a lot of different people. So figured it might be worthwhile, beginning there before we kind of jump into some of the ins and outs and why brand is such a critical piece of this. Charlie, you want to go first?
Sure. I think we've all probably heard the definition, maybe to some degree, of it's what people say behind your back when you're not in the room. I think that maybe has some element there of what your brand is, and maybe your personal brand and your company brand. I've always believed that brand is, and I've tried to explain this internally at companies, but it's all the little things that add up. And so like you think of, a lot of people maybe think logo as brand, but that's one piece to it. It's how it's the elevator pitch everyone in the organization says when they're asked, well, where do you work and what do you do? It's your email signature, like we're talking about a little bit now. It's just making sure that everyone's using the right colors and why that's important. Making sure that you're delivering on what you say. So it's all those little things that add up. I think that kind of encompasses your overall brand, and it's not just the logo. And I think it's incumbent upon marketers to help the rest of the organization understand why all those little things matter and why all those little things add up to building a successful brand, to kind of just keep that momentum going.
So yeah, I think for me, really, it's sort of everything that Charlie's just said. It's everything about you. It's your identity. It's it's everything that you do, everything the company says, every employee says. It's everything that you sort of stand for as a business. And when it's not authentic, and when it's not consistent, and when it's not clear, and it's not present, I think, especially in today's modern interconnected world where expectations are so high, people realize very, very quickly. And I think it's just so important to have that kind of clear consistency, that messaging, that representation. It's the heart and soul of what the business does, and it's that identity. So I think it's every single sales call your team is on, every promise that you make and every promise that you break. That's the biggest deal, I think, as well. So it's really, for us, important. And I think seeing that strong branding really does drive those consistent returns that's beyond just that short-term win that you might get from something. It's like every element. And when we measure what we label as our brand score, and we look at everything. We don't just look at, do people like the colors of our brand? We look at, what are they saying about us in the places that we don't know? What are they saying in communities? What are they saying on, things like Glassdoor? Like every element is important, not just kind of your brand or your share of voice in a market. It really is all encompassing, I think. Oh, I think your mic's dropped out, Jason.
We might have lost Jason there for a minute.
Yeah, I think Jason's mic's dropped off.
Am I here?
Yeah.
There we go.
So, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. We've had some issues here in Knoxville. There was some loud boom and houses shaking and stuff like that yesterday. So entire cell networks have gone down. But hopefully that was a one and done there. Anyway, apologies for that, Carol. I was saying I know you guys recently went through a substantial rebrand. And so would love to hear kind of what the motivations were, what the goals were relative to that, because I know what a huge undertaking that is to try and do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of one of those things everyone says, oh, a new CMO comes in and they want to do a rebrand. And it's like, absolutely the last thing most CMOs I think want to do. Like if you get there and that's done, you're like, thank God for that, because it is a really massive undertaking. It's not for the faint-hearted. But when I started at Exclaimer, we'd actually been through an element of a rebrand, but it hadn't been completed. So they'd kind of, I guess it hadn't landed. The work that they'd done hadn't quite kind of got all the way through. When I looked at the brand, it was really just kind of literally a logo and a color and a few colors. It wasn't a huge amount else. If you went past 3 pages of our website, you'd have all the same pictures. Like the brand was limiting. And I think it also limits like people's perception, but also internally, like people weren't proud. Like they didn't go in being like, I work for this company and, I'm proud of what we do. And, it gives you that kind of element, especially for employees in terms of your brand and your advocacy and how employees feel. So, we had all the internal elements of people not actually using the brand, not updating things, not caring. It didn't stretch and it didn't scale with the business. So one of the big things for me is like, how can a brand scale with you as you grow? How can you start to, really stretch things and make it work for you? And also it looked great across everything from online to print to events as well. So we were in a situation where, we weren't getting a lot of feedback. I was hiring a big team and, had a lot of people where I was talking about a brand. They were like, oh, when's the brand coming? I was like, well, we delivered one just before I started, but we are gonna make a change. So, I went out to market and looked at that. But really, I think the biggest thing for me was to actually do that sell internally. And as you say, everyone's got the view of the CMO that comes in and is like, goes to the investors. And by the way, I'm going to spend loads of your marketing dollars on this brand, which obviously I had to do. So I did talk to the investors and I walked them through. We did a research study, perspectives. To be honest, it was bad enough that the investors, luckily our investors, they're private equity, but they have a marketing center of excellence who are amazing to kind of help me set the scene to really go through, no, actually, this will negatively impact in the future in terms of where it goes. So it was incredible for me to have that support from the investors and to help them understand that as well. And we just did a huge survey across both our partners, our channel business, people coming on board, what they felt and thought, and use that to kind of inform where we went. So yeah, it was a big undertaking. And then everything like the spreadsheets, the rollouts, the updates, and it was massive. I also did a rebrand at Skyscanner and that was huge, rolling out 30 odd markets across kind of a 24-hour time period. So it's definitely a fun undertaking.
Yeah, I'm glad you said what you did about this actually not being what most of us want to do, because it is literally one of the things furthest down on my list that I've enjoyed tackling in my career and my roles. It is a painful process a lot of the time and a huge undertaking. So obviously, kind of the place we begun with this is that, brand can play a huge role in go-to-market and demand within a company. Why and how do you guys, believe that? How do you connect brand with actual demand gen and revenue? And then, an add-on to that, how, if you do you measure that type of thing? Because that's one of the other things that's come out of what's happened over the last year and a half or so is that everybody, but especially investors, want to know what's the ROI, what's the attribution to this, and something that's as wide ranging as brand can be. That's a lot of times difficult to kind of nail down. Charlie, want to lead us off there?
Sure. I think, and Carol, great definition or explanation of going through a rebrand, because it's like the iceberg analogy of all the things underneath the water that you don't see that you just have to execute on. I think that goes into probably the ROI piece is you have to be upfront. You have to know that not everything is going to be attributed to a metric that maybe is what you'd be used to from like a paid acquisition standpoint. You can get a pretty good idea from paid search and share those metrics, and a board or a president or somebody may understand those. I think that goes back to a little bit what Carol was saying before, is that a lot of the internal education has to happen. And that's really a big part of what branding is and how that all fits together. So it has to start with the educating those internally around, there's some things that are going to take longer to put an ROI on. And some of those things you can look at different metrics around, like if there's positive press references that happen over a certain period of time, like you can measure those against a previous period, for example, that can show positive brand attribution versus maybe something that just wasn't there before. So there's other ways that I think you have to tie that together with what would be maybe looked upon as demand gen tactics or ROI references that they may be used to. So I think it just has to be able to be, you have to tell that full story of, here are some things that maybe are going to take a little bit longer, and here's some executions of that we're going to try that are going to help to solidify the story. And sort of that research that Carol talked about, you can use that to benchmark to say, hey, there was confusion in the marketplace. We did a survey with our customers or with closed loss deals that of why they didn't go with us. And there was confusion there. We were missing the mark. So you can go back to that and reference in the past and say, we made these changes. Here's our ICP, for example, that we were able to get penetration on, and you can sort of go back into some of those numbers there. So I think it really starts with telling the internal story and helping others that are helping to build that rebrand or to understand why brand is important, to have them understand what metrics, and all agree upon what metrics are going to be tracked. And it's going to be a marriage of some of those traditional demand gen metrics that you see, but also some longer tail efforts that you just have to have everybody understand why it might take a little bit longer for that investment to come back.
Great. Carol?
Yeah, obviously I completely agree with Charlie, and we've definitely agreed on most things so far, but that, I think for me, it's like, as a CMO, I guess markets are increasingly competitive. It's increasingly challenging to do things. And I think I've been sort of talking a lot recently in terms of like the playbooks that we used to rely on for activities for lead generation, for even demand generation, they're not really working anymore to create those successful go-to-market strategies. And I think almost like the kind of underlying thread or like the connecting thread behind it all is that brand element that just joins everything really well together. And we have, I think almost by our own fault, kind of over-indexed on things that are measurable because they're measurable and because it's easy. And also it's not really helped us teach the CFO kind of person in that, you give us a quarter and we'll give you a gumball, like hello campaign, we get, you get something out. So it's that kind of mentality that we've almost kind of perpetuated with the ease of lead generation and relying on short-term tactics that have just been like, what you put in, you get exactly out, but you don't do anything more than that kind of short-term element. And so I think that was another challenge I found at Exclaimer. We were very reliant on PPC, on lead generation, but the second you turn off the taps, you turn off that money, everything stops. So you're in a situation where you've never like built any equity, you've not built the goodwill, you've not built the trust, you've not kind of invested for the longer term. And that's sort of the problem that you have in that situation. So I think there's an element of like, a massive underinvestment in brand as a result of things being, easy, being investable, being kind of, ROI on that side of things. And then also massive change in buyer journeys. I think, obviously we're saying the last year things have changed, but over the last 5 years, everyone's gone online, huge reliance in terms of those journeys. People actually no longer will consult first party data. They'll go into review sites. They've got so many opportunities. They don't want to give you the email. I know I deliberately avoid giving my email despite being a marketer and knowing how helpful it is if people give you their email, but people don't want to. And that whole buyer journey has gone all those phases through. I think Sixth Sense were just saying like 70 or 80% of the buyer journey happens before you even know about it, before it even comes into your kind of ecosystem. So unless people know about you, you're interacting in the places that they care about, you're trusted, you're recommended, you've got good good standing on, whether it's review sites or word of mouth or communities, or working with other people and having an opportunity to sort of network. Like, you don't ever build beyond that sort of first point. So I think it's just hugely important. And then I think your second question was around kind of quantifying it and measuring it. I mentioned we have what we call a brand impact score that we've worked with Insight on. And we look at kind of awareness, like how familiar are they with your brand, your power of voice, your engagement, the perception, which for us is things like peer review, analyst ratings, review sites, etc., and also employee metrics, so Glassdoor, people staying, people being happy, because feedback of our employees, because obviously they're the face of the brand, they're like the cold face of what people see. So for us, it's kind of a blend, and we kind of put that into a black box and make a magic number and say whether we feel we're doing better or worse. But we track all those metrics, whether it's search ranks or share of voice or engagements and social media and things. So it helps us kind of measure that we've got that consistency and it's running through.
No, that's great. And yeah, I agree with you, Carol. I think so much of this came from like that growth at all cost mentality, trying to find the easy buttons, and that also aligned with the time of sort of the digital revolution. So you go back 15, 20 years, like we didn't have this ability to do direct attribution for most things that we were doing. And so marketing used to be correlation. It used to be, hey, we did this and correlated to this result, and it allowed you to be able to much more effectively be able to run and execute and justify things like brand that in a direct correlation, easy button growth at all cost type motion become much more nebulous, and much for those kind of that are not familiar with that or not comfortable with that. Makes them feel a little bit like, is this where we should be allocating our money? Like I can't look at a spreadsheet and say that X amount of people in seats and X amount of spend is going to automatically equate to the X amount of pipeline and revenue. And so by nature or by result of that, I'm uncomfortable with it. And I think a lot of that is what kind of drove us into the place we are. And then, like I was alluding to earlier, it's also part of what makes me not hate where we are so much, because it's like, okay, it's sort of back to basics. It's all the things we actually knew we needed to be doing, and what the best practices were that we all sort of got away from, and a lot of people were able to get away with not doing. So kind of a add-on or a follow-on to that, how do you look at brand in terms of growth trajectory of companies? How does that play into it, and what role does that play on that side of things? Carol, you want to start?
I think in terms of like the growth trajectory, it has obviously all the elements that I mentioned. We measure, it kind of impacts all of those areas. So you've got this longer term kind of like slowly growing up, element in terms of that. And it gives you that sort of trajectory. It shortens sales cycles. People know about you. They trust you. You're recommended. You're viewed as authentic. You've got the messaging wrapping around people. So I think what the current sort of climate means is that we have to focus on the prioritization of channels, be really careful what we do. You don't have infinite money, you don't have infinite resources. So you have to be really careful of like what works for you, but also what opportunities there are, what converts the best. So it's almost like this new era that we're in demands this prioritization, this really good focus, while always making sure you're very authentic and you're very, stick to what you keep that good quality of messaging. And, we found for us, obviously doing huge partnerships and working with review sites has been fantastic. Working with communities, making sure that we're really present, and also encouraging, I want people who work for me and people who are in my team to feel that actually their career is enriched. They have the opportunity to learn, to be involved, to get the opportunity to do more, to talk about what they've learned and share things. And I think that kind of real authentic voice is really sort of helping as well. But it's, for us, it's sort of that side. And also just making sure our campaigns are really, really integrated. We've been working really hard to make sure, anything that we put out, whether it's a campaign, it represents through our advertising, through our ABM, through our plays, website, obviously email signatures. Being an email signature company, we make sure that everything kind of clicks all the way through. So, it's kind of making sure that consistency, and people, they see you, they recognize you, they know who you are, that, it's easy. We're not obviously not Apple or anything like that, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do things in the best possible way, in my belief. So that's sort of how we kind of represent it.
Oh, you, Charlie?
I think Carol just hit on a number of things that highlight the human element to brand. Review sites, that's a human giving hopefully an honest review of a product. It's not a product telling you how great the product is. Building your employee base, and that's a way to track back too. Like, you can reduce recruitment costs by building internal brand and having the ability to recruit people and not have to pay externally. So there's ways to do that. I think that but you've seen a lot of brands out there that give a voice to their employees, and that helps when you're thinking about the companies that are not in market to buy, the 95% of people that aren't ready to buy yet, but they remember you because they see your brand consistently. So I think you can build that story along, especially for companies that have long sales cycles like we do. We have a long sales cycle. So to be in front of people with honest human stories when they are ready to buy, as opposed to just running ads and telling them how great we are and having other people tell them how great we can be in communities, or the back channeling or the dark social, or however you want to phrase that. That's all humans, and kind of giving up some freedom of that brand to humans to be able to tell that story. I think you've seen companies that have been successful being able to do that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Right. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Carol, please.
I was just going to say, I think the human touch element that you touched upon is really, where it's going. And, especially when you think, and I know everyone's terrified on, the impacts of privacy regulations and where everything's going and how will AI impact, like you could almost unpick 1 million hours worth of marketing content on the areas there. But, as you are in that situation where we're going to have to rely on, not just the cheap, easy, free, or, the sort of fast tactics to growth, you're actually having to build those relationships and do things in the proper way. It is on that human element, that interaction, that conversation, building rapport, gaining trust. And, I think for us, as we're starting to look at how we insulate and how we expand our channels and our marketing mix to make sure that we are able to cope with the impact of search results in Gen AI, and not being able to necessarily, we do hold ourselves quite stringently to sort of the ways that you should behave with your data. But, as you're less and less able to kind of apply cookies and things, like where do you end up going? And it is that human touch, that one-to-one element, that building the proper relationships in the right way. And I think it's such a fascinating space right now, where we are now in terms of almost like the precipice of a new era of marketing is fascinating.
Well, since you already went to where I was going to go, obviously we are in a time that is radically changing and doing it extremely quickly and accelerating, with things like AI, with things like privacy, with things like changes within the technology infrastructure, like around cookies and things like that. And I think you guys nailed the overarching answer to the question, which is how is this going to shift and shape, and it's going to be that human element of it. But let's go into a little bit of the nuance and the detail of what do you see shifting and changing that you think is going to be the biggest drivers of changes and shifts relative to branding, its role, its importance, and how it plays a role within growing organizations. Charlie, you wanna lead us off?
Sure. I think back to the last question we just talked about, it's going to be the human piece. I think, everyone tried to figure out last year, how you can integrate AI into some sort of capacity within your marketing structure or function. And I think now that we've found that, it's going to save a lot of time, but it's not going to replace marketers anytime soon. It's not going to replace copywriting anytime soon. It's going to help and get you there. But I think the brands that are going to go back to that idea of showing some human element there, and not just churning out the same marketing that maybe they're used to or seeing from others is gonna win. And I think that's because it's going to be very easy for a lot of brands to churn out a lot of content or resources, but you can sort of see through some of it, at least now, where the brands that are doing a little bit more personalization, the brands that are focusing on the community element, that back channeling, the human element. Now that can't be done for everybody, because at scale that can be difficult. But I think that technology is there to help us get to a point, and then that whatever percentage left over, that 20-30%, to personalize it, to humanize it, to be specific to the person that you're trying to talk to as a prospect or a potential customer. Those are the brands that are going to win. And I think that there's a lot of resources out there that are going to help us, but there still needs to be the human element and the creative element, especially in B2B, so that we don't all look the same and talk the same, to stand out a little bit. And I think the companies that invest in the branding piece to that, they are gonna stand out.
Yeah,
That's great.
I agree as well. I think it's like, that power of brand investment, especially when, those search results, they're being influenced by AI, by, so many other things, your competitors, the review sites, and sort of first, second, third party data. It's a huge amount. If people don't, it'll be increasingly challenging to find things, increasingly challenging to find brands. If people don't know who you are, then how will they even know to search for you or where to search for you? It's just going to be so challenging. So I think that really robust kind of brand and focus on brand does help you stand out, and it ensures that you're there in the answer to content queries, you're there to answer problems, you're present within those search results. So I think not investing in that brand will impact your demand gen results and your discoverability, and also your ability to kind of have that license to win deals. So I think as the underpinning, as Charlie said, it really is around the brand element. In terms of sort of other shifts that we're sort of seeing, and as you also noted, it is that mass personalization. When you think of AI, I read a quote I think it was in Harvard Business Review, where they're like, AI isn't going to take your job, but it will be taken by a marketer who uses AI better and faster than you do. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like people who aren't at the forefront, who aren't testing and playing, and CMOs, I'm challenging my team every day, like, what tools can you use? What's the new prompt? Have you built this? Have you tried this? And loads of them are doing it way better than me, because obviously I'm older than a lot of them, but that's no excuse. I don't think it is that element. It's so much fun to play with things and learn new things, and there's so much opportunity right now. So I think, as people do expect that personalization, you can facilitate that at scale with AI. You can get some fantastic tools that enable you to do it. And then, as you say, you add that layer of personalization, that area of human touch on the top to make sure, but to speed up your ability to do things, to plug things in, to connect the dots. It's just incredible to help you get that going. And as I noted around kind of zero click and that exciting trend that we're going to be seeing, I think if we're disrupting SEO, we're looking at search results, whether or not people can find you. I think a number of research that I read recently, and I honestly can't remember where it's from, but there was something like 25% of search traffic could be lost because of the changes that's going to be happening in search results. So I think you're still going to be favoring like quality, human, well-written content. Like, that's still going to be there, but it's making sure that you've got everything backing it up, and every touch point. And I think the other thing I mentioned for us is really important, is relying on that kind of review sites, those networks, the people, the community, and getting people to give their reviews, because people ultimately, probably because of our fast growth tactics, don't necessarily trust marketers and salespeople. So trust people who give the reviews on your website and on the things that you do. So I think for us, it's really important to not just understand and be at the cold face of getting that feedback, but to also give people that opportunity and leverage it for sort of your own good as well. Because if you are doing a good job, then that really shines through.
Yeah, I love what you said about the ways to use AI, because I think AI is going to be no different than all of these other things that we've encountered over the last 15, 20 years, whether that be mass email sending with marketing automation tools, whether that be sequencing tools, whether that be dialers, access to massive amounts of data on people and stuff like that. Like, you can misuse it, or you can use it to really elevate your game. And so we're going to see a lot of people that use it as an easy button and a shortcut, and I think it's going to bite them in the butt sooner than later by for doing that. But the flip side of it is you can use it to enable you and give you time and ability to be able to really go and do deep dives and customize your content, and really speak to that audience in ways that you would have never had the resources and the bandwidth to do if you didn't have something to kind of do some of that initial heavy lifting, giving you the freedom and the ability to focus on that last 10 to 20%, to get it really dialed in and really speak to that audience. And so I think it's a perfect example of how all of this stuff can be used in an easy button type way that gets people in trouble, or it can be used in a sophisticated way that really elevates what you're doing in your game. And I think at heart, that sophisticated motion is at heart of a lot of the branding stuff that you guys are talking about. It's not taking that easy route. It's saying, okay, this is going to enable me to go and do something better than I could have done otherwise. And I love the authenticity piece that you guys have both hit on. It reminds me of something that I discovered the hard way early on, and it was much to my pleasant surprise. Anytime I've done something that was like a mass, like especially like a marketing automation, I just blasted an email to 200,000 people with like the wrong target, the wrong information, the wrong content, whatever. Every time I've done that and I've gone back out and said, hey, that was me. Oops, sorry. Own that. I'm a human being over here. The response to it has been overwhelmingly positive, like, and all the way to the tune of like massive opportunities, deals closed, stuff like that, because it's like, okay, you're human, you're authentic, you messed up, you didn't like go try and like hide it or blame it on somebody or whatever. Like, you just came out and said like, sorry, and don't get me wrong, don't make a practice of doing this type of thing, but if you do, like, authenticity, like, find those opportunities to be authentic, to own things and all of that stuff, and it goes a really long way relative to that brand, instead of being like a faceless, voiceless company that just cranking out generic stuff. Before we go into some of the stuff around kind of a segue from that into some what role trust plays in this and stuff, we've got a couple of questions that are tied to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier around how do you track this within the data, how do you go and share this back up to your C-suite, your board, your investors. In particular, Ryan was asking about what do you do whenever your investors, your board, your C-suite don't believe in investing in marketing, but still expect all of these results from it. And so I know we touched on some of these, but maybe speak a little bit more specifically to what Ryan and Bill were talking about here. In particular, how do you speak to those that may not have that buy-in or that understanding of the role that branding and marketing play in this, and in particular, what investment needs to be made in support of it?
Carol, you want to go?
I mean, it is a really hard one, and it is one of those things like whenever you kind of go into a board meeting or anything, you always have to know your numbers, because it's the first thing most people on boards have generally got a background in finance or accounting or similar. So, you do need to know, and it is very hard to kind of take that perception when you're like, we're going to spend this money and it's going to probably end up somewhere here, but we can't necessarily say exactly where it will end up. But I think it's kind of showing them the longer term elements, and like the whole, if we're just spending and we're buying current traffic, like, PPC kind of equivalent, all we're ever doing is buying what's right there right now, but we're never creating more. Like, you're eventually tapping out what your opportunity is, because you're never actually influencing opinion or search or recommendation. You're never growing that sort of share of voice or elements in the industry. So I think it's kind of explaining to them and helping them see from that, and sort of showing that you've got this kind of like linear money in, money out situation. Or if you start to invest, it starts to kind of, augment and go up over time. So it's kind of giving them, yes, it's not, your classic hockey stick, but it is that kind of, sustained growth, and gives you something to go back on, and then kind of tying in the other elements of, your short term and your long term, the things like pricing power. Sometimes saying, referring to pricing power gets them quite excited, because then they're like, oh, I can charge more money, I can make more money. So things like pricing power, closing deals faster, trust, the fact that you wouldn't open the door to someone you didn't necessarily know, you trust what they say, and you trust their opinions and how they sell things. So I think that's a really good way. And things like, I guess your category and how you're building that category, and the sort of optionality and the loss to your competitors, and that sort of like, longer term returns does help them sort of put it in a place in their mind, in the sense that you invest in your people and you invest in your operational structure and things. So it's almost like that kind of operational expense rather than just a straight off sort of brand or marketing expense, I think helps. But yeah, it's never the easiest conversation.
What about you, Charlie?
It is hard. I think I would start with trying to, this goes back to internal education and marketing, but I would really try to understand where they're coming from, because if they're not coming from organizations that if it's more sales focused and direct sales, and just understand their mentality and mindset of where they're coming from to understand what truly marketing means to them. And I would ask a lot of questions. Who does, in your mind, who's a good marketer? What brand does a really good job? Because you can come back and probably get some idea of what they're spending or what their team looks like. I've gone through this in the past. I was the first marketer at an organization with over 100 salespeople, and I was the first marketer for a while and built a small team, but had to service 100 salespeople. And it was about deal acceleration and how do we help with that. And there was a lot of pushback from a lot of the ownership. And I spent time individually with each of them trying to understand, well, what does good look like to you? And help me understand if this was an investment versus they saw it as a sunk cost. And just really, it took some time, but helping them understand, if we invest in this and we can do certain things that we've never done before, like be able to do ABM type campaigns and give you the metrics to see when someone's actually interested versus just a lot of guessing. Light bulbs start to go off, and you can start to build some credibility around with some quick wins to show, okay, maybe we need to think about this a little differently. But it really, I think you have to understand where they're coming from. You have to understand their perception. And then you can come back, like Carol said, knowing your numbers with data to help educate, to say, well, if we think this is good, or we think this company does a really good job, here's about what they're spending, or here's about the size of their team, because one person can't do everything, and they have specialists that are really good at these functions. They have really good people to help with sales enablement. And then you can start to help build that story. But it's difficult to do, to ask for everything right off the bat can be difficult. But I think if you can build some quick wins and start some conversations to understand where they're coming from, hopefully you can meet somewhere in the middle ground.
I like your consent. Go ahead, Carol. Sorry.
I was just going to say, one additional thing that actually helped me was the view of, we were spending a lot of money on our digital advertising. And my view is, like, I'm not necessarily going to stop spending money, but I'm going to fill that funnel faster. And if we invest in our content, in our SEO, and bringing people to our site, then I'll give a matched contribution from that SEO element. So I just potentially set myself up for a problem, but it worked. Because we'd never invested in that content or that SEO. So it's like, we're going to invest in our website and who we are, what we stand for, that clarity of messaging, of being there where people are searching. But instead of having to pay for that search, we're actually going to earn that place. We're going to start to be, part of that conversation. We're going to, take part in it. So it's actually bringing so much more to the brand when you sort of almost look at it at that side, because you do have that opportunity to really invest in the kind of softer side and the content and the SEO and, your links and how you kind of show up in the marketplace as well. So that I'd sort of forgotten a bit, but that was an element that I really kind of went hard into as we build out what we do. That's it.
I like your approach towards trying to build consensus, Charlie. I self-admittedly, I may be a little bit too combative in these types of scenarios, and so I'd probably do well to learn some lessons and take some away from that.
And I've learned that the hard way. Believe me, I've done that. You're coming from a different perspective, and it's like, well, you hired me as the expert in this field or arena, and I think I know what, I'm not going to know everything, but I think I know what that is. And Ryan added some context to his question, so I want to kind of maybe add a little bit more to it now that maybe there's some understanding behind it. But over communicating to leadership, especially when you can get an idea of their mentality or their perception of what marketing is critical. And I've learned this the hard way, because there can be the assumption that I've done this. I've made the assumption that they don't care about the nuance or the minutia of the details, or I shouldn't have to share this because it's just implied or whatever. But I think by being very upfront and sharing, I made a hypothesis. Here's what I think is going to happen. Here are the steps we're going to take. Here's what may happen, best case scenario, or like, here's something that may not work, but we're going to learn from it. I think over communicating, especially when there's apprehension towards the marketing function or just a misunderstanding of it, over communicating early and often can help with that. And like you said, Jason, it could be easy to maybe have a little arrogance there to say like, well, no, I know what I'm doing. Sure, you might, but there might be situations in the past that they were burned before with, or with a previous marketer, or they've just, like there was no insight into where spend went, or there was just a bad marketing mix of channels. So I think by helping to understand that and then say, okay, that's something different, but here's where I would maybe take an approach and try some different things, and here's what it's going to look like. You can maybe ease some minds there a little bit. I think that helps a little bit.
It's funny. I think thinking back on my career, I think how I fell into growth is really kind of my true role and philosophy and what I do and stuff like that. Because I was doing growth before it was even a concept out of Facebook or Silicon Valley. I was like, oh, hey, there's a name for this thing. But I think I fell into it because I felt the need to use data to help solve these things. Whereas like I just got tired of like butting heads with people, and I was like, okay, let's test it. Let's go to the data, let's go to the scoreboard and see what comes of it. And I think, on the data, driven side of it and stuff like that, it kind of largely falls into one of two buckets that we've touched upon. One is the stuff that's directly attributable and measurable, things like reviews, things like sentiment, things like that, where it's like, hey, this is a pretty clear direct link to what brand is and represents, relative to the audience and our customers. And then there's the indirect stuff, which is what impact do these efforts around branding and improving branding have on things like organic, like sales cycles, like close rates, all of these things on the go-to-market side, which done properly, brands should move the needle in a positive direction relative to all of those. And so you're back to sort of that correlation game. Hey, we made these investments of time, effort, energy, manpower to try and move the needle relative to brand within this specific area or arena, whatever. And so we would expect there to be results that are measurable around that. And talking about what you were talking about, Charlie, go into it with like, hey, this is the hypothesis, this is the test, this is the variable, and this is what we expect to see. And then we're going to come back and we're going to revisit that. And I think that for a lot of people helps me with it. I'm not going to say it solves for it, because I'll share the other side of it. I commiserate oftentimes with other marketers, and I know that sentiment that's pretty common is marketers are blamed for most go-to-market problems. We get short shift on where we've moved the needle, for where we've made the impact. And holy crap, have I never had so many executives and C-suites know that they can do marketing and do it better than anybody else, even though they've never done it before, which makes for a very difficult role a lot of times. But yeah, let's jump into before we get too short on time, because I think this one's critical to it, especially on that authenticity piece. I think authenticity and trust go hand in hand with each other, and I think authenticity is really kind of at the heart of what really makes or breaks a lot of brands, and trust is an integral piece of that. You guys shared a interesting stat with me. Zendesk says that 83% of consumers say that they refuse to engage with a brand they don't trust. Like, that's really compelling. That's an enormous stat. So how do you guys, understanding how important that trust element is and that authenticity is, how do you drive that relative to what you guys are doing with branding? Because obviously that can play out in all kinds of different ways.
I think for us, like, we kind of focus on it in two areas, and one is kind of that consistency in terms of really making sure that our brand is consistent. We've got really strong messaging, we've got clear narratives, we've got clear points of view. We do a lot of work in terms of, and I think someone mentioned in a question around jobs to be done framework and personas, like we utilize both and kind of switch in and out of them, but make sure that in terms of what we're saying and what we're doing is accurate, is fair, is represented, but it's also consistent and clear and easy to follow across different messaging. So we work really hard to do that. We don't always get it right, and we're always very, very willing to apologize. And certainly, there's always someone who's like, well, this work, and you're like, yes, we know, thanks. But you know, everyone's a marketer, as you said. So it's like, it's making sure that you really do invest, and it's important that, you know, your campaigns are consistent, they've got clear messaging, they're to the point, they're relevant, they're accurate, because people do notice, and it is important. So it is that really element of like authenticity. And I think that communication, you know, relying on good, strong one-to-one, clear, people-first communication is really, really important as you sort of, especially as you evolve the relationship with your customers. And I think the other element is around just, you know, if you care about the customers, if you are a customer-centric brand, like we always say that we want to deliver customer-centric growth through ourselves and the customer success team. Like, that's what we care about. We care that, you know, I guess it's kind of the idea that your customer doesn't care that, you know, marketing hand over to sales, who hand over to customer success, who then throw you back at marketing so they can get more money out of you. You know, they want to experience a good, clear, consistent message that lives up to every promise you make at every stage, and that works and functions for them. So we always try and really focus our teams on, actually, you know, it's what the customer cares about that counts, and that's what's important. So I think it is that messaging, communication, and also customer focus for us that really works.
What about you, Charlie?
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of great things there. I think it comes back to, and not to beat this drum, but like just the human piece. Like I saw a stat somewhere where that there's just a trust factor when people are telling the truth, and it's not a matter of, you know, sales. Our sales team right now, our BDR function is under marketing, and so we work very closely around the messaging. So doing things like not talking to someone only at end of quarter, because you know that that's self-serving. Being upfront. So Jason, you gave that example of like, we made a mistake on our email. We're humans. Like, owning up to stuff like that builds credibility. Even if it doesn't happen right away, that story is being told in a community somewhere by somebody else, and you may not see it, but that brings volume. Like Carol, like you said, with customer service, not talking to someone only when it's up for renewal time, but sharing your product roadmap and sharing some misses. Like I think I was just sharing on review sites. I saw somewhere where companies that have like a 4 or 4.5 stars out of 5 are thought to be more trustworthy than those that just show 5 out of 5, because no one believes that everyone gets a 5 out of 5. So there's a lot that could be done there of just like, you know, being a human element. I mean, it's easy to do things when you're sending out a lot of emails, but having little simple things as opposed to sending like a role-based email versus having an email that someone could reply to and talk to somebody, that holds some credibility of like, hey, there's a human behind this. It's not just a don't reply to this email type thing. So there's all these little things that go back to, like, I guess what we said in the beginning. All those little things add up to what brand is. But I think trust, there's a piece to that comes with trust of, hey, the person I talk to, they're telling me the truth. They're not telling me that we can do everything, or we could be a customer for everyone. There's a lot of people that you could say no to, and that's going to hold a lot of weight, because they're going to tell somebody else like, hey, we're not a good fit for them, but they might be a good fit for you. And all of a sudden there's a referral that comes in for that. And by the way, I think I've seen a lot of companies that are starting to do things like asking how someone found them, as opposed to just relying on like ATM or a UTM data, making that a mandatory field, because they're going to tell you something very different from a qualitative standpoint versus a quantitative standpoint. And that goes back to like making better ROI decisions on where or what channels people use, but they're going to tell you some really interesting things. So I think, just again, back to that, not to beat a dead horse with this, but the human piece to it, and being upfront and owning your mistakes, but also, you know, like telling the truth in a lot of in your marketing, but in your sales messaging. I think that helps just build an overall trust brand.
One of the things I love that you said there was, you know, around, you know, a specific use case of this, of like, hey, you don't seem like a fit to us. So we're not going to try and, you know, put a round peg in a square hole. And, you know, I think these things are very underappreciated most of the time, where it's like, you know, not only is that the right thing to do, not only is that something that's good for brand and, you know, reputation and stuff like that, but, you know, we're seeing this, you know, right now, and, you know, the shift that's happened, you know, away from growth at all costs, where all these companies took on all of the customers they could just to get logos, and a lot of the time we're forcing that round peg in a square hole. And now they've got enormous churn problems. They've got enormous problems with customer success and stuff like that. And so that actually has a very, very large and substantial impact on the viability of the company, like period. It gets to the very core of a company's viability, its profitability, and all of those things. And so it's one of those where a lot of times it's counterintuitive, or at least not immediately visible. But more often than not, if you dig deep enough, you see how doing these right things from just doing the right thing, a brand standpoint, an authenticity standpoint, and all of that stuff have very tangible impacts in the overall viability of the company. And I think that's oftentimes really underappreciated a lot of times. Cool. So one more, let's see, making sure that we don't have any other questions that we have not missed. Doesn't look like. So one last piece of it, we got about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we get to touch on this. So I think something that comes out of this authenticity and engaging with your customers and stuff like that is that at heart, you're creating a community whenever you're doing that. And so, I think that's something that a lot of people don't really think through or think about with this, that it's really a two-way street. If you think about it, how do you have trust if you're only being spoken at and you're not heard? So, what do you guys see as the role of community, and how are you guys leveraging and building that as part of this overall branding strategy?
I could start. I think communities, it's a hot word right now. I think it's what's been around in the past. It's got a better focus. Word of mouth has always been a part of marketing, but now there's maybe a more singular focus around how do we build that ourselves, or how do we partner with others, and just how do we educate in a maybe a smaller environment that we can control a little bit. But people are looking for answers. They don't want to just rely on what is maybe said on your website. So they're going to talk to peers. I mean, I'm a part of maybe too many communities where it's, like that's part of the problem now, is there's a community for everything, which is great because you can niche down or go broad. But they're looking for answers. They're looking for peers to bounce ideas off of. They're looking for resources. And that's where legitimate conversations are happening, because it's not how great we are, and it's just all the positive things. You hear both of those things. Jason, like you talked about churn, you could ask somebody if they've used a tool, and they're going to tell you the bad about the onboarding, and then all of a sudden the smoke and mirrors that were presented to them. That's going to affect, even if nobody responds to that, there could be hundreds or 1,000 people that see that message and that thread, and they're going to make a decision off of that. So community is really, really important, I think, especially with, like, I think Carol said this earlier, listening to what people are saying about your brand. Even if you're not engaging with it or going back and forth with them, you're going to see positive sentiment. You're going to see negative sentiment. That should be information that you can present back to your product team to say, hey, a lot of people are talking about this. Is that on our roadmap? Are we fixing that? You can understand the terminology that people use so that you're not using marketing speak. You're talking like the customer talks. So there's so many valuable tenets that can come out of investing in community. It could be a lot to build your own. Starting simple with engaging in other communities and finding your ways to input yourself into those is important. But that's where people are going for the word of mouth. They're going for validation. They're going to talk to their peers. So you have to be there, and you have to use that to listen, but also it could give your sales team good insight. It could give your product team good insight. It could give some really good validation for marketing. So I think it's going to be a continual place where in 2024 and beyond, people are going to invest time. And I think all brands really have to figure out how to manage that.
Yeah, I think
Awesome.
I completely agree with everything you said. And I think it's especially important when you think that, we're probably going to see a lot of changes in search and in results and in, the data we have access to. So, having that word of mouth and building upon the like traditional things that we used to do and starting to kind of almost encompass, the review sites, the communities, the public kind of sources of sharing information, social media, and the press as well, like starting to bring it together and having a cohesive, coordinated strategy around them. And I think, as you said, building your own community can be a real challenge. And also it's like, there are some amazing brands that have built a community that's trusted, like the Salesforce trailblazing kind of community is fantastic. And, you'd want to be a part of it. And a lot of other big brands, but it is a lot of work. It's really hard. It's a lot of investment, but partnering with people that have similar aims and similar areas of work and similar investments and interests as you, it is such a fantastic opportunity to not only learn as, as a marketer and as a brand, but also to kind of be a part of something and join in where the conversations are happening as well. So, or where we're coming close.
Awesome. No, that was perfect timing. We are officially at the top of the hour. Guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for coming on. For the audience, we will get a link to the recap out to you guys in the next day or so. You can reply to that or get back to us if you have any questions that we didn't get to or came up to you after this is over. And I think that's got everything. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.